Hello and welcome to Gatecrashers. Today we are exploring Gate 31. In human design, Gate 31 is the gate of influence, of leadership, and the voice the group keeps electing. In this Gatecrashers episode, we explore the energy of Gate 31 through the character of Bert. This is a series that brings the human design gates to life through story and pattern and lived expression. And Gate 31 explores leadership that only works when it's recognized, influence in the right timing, and speaking for the collective, not at it. If you're studying human design or you're exploring your own chart, this story may help you recognize the energy in real life. Bert grows leeks on his plot at the Pumphrey Road allotments, and he has never in his life put himself forward for anything. Which is a strange thing to be true of a man who has been chair of the Pumphrey Road Allotment Society for 7 years. He has never once stood, and yet he holds the highest office the other lotties have to offer. Every spring, the thing simply happens again, the way weather happens, with no say from Bert at all. Somebody puts his name down. The name goes on the ballot, and when the little slips are counted out on the trestle table by the shed, Bert has won again, by a considerable margin. He doesn't campaign. He has never made a speech that lasted longer than it takes the kettle to boil, and if you asked him why people keep voting for him, he'd look genuinely baffled, and then offer you a courgette because by now it's August, and in August there's always a wonderful glut of something, and it's very often courgettes. What Bert does, and he does it without appearing to do anything at all, is be the one the others turn to when something actually matters. You can see it in how the place runs around him. When the new family took on Plot 14 and stood there staring at a wilderness of bindweed like people who'd thought they'd bought a house and actually looks like they'd found a swamp instead, it was Bert who wandered over. Not with advice exactly, because Bert would never give you advice you hadn't asked for, but with a spare fork, a flask, and some digestive biscuits, and a quiet little, here, this corner here, I'd start here, that turned an impossible thing into a thing with a first step. When old Mr. Okafor was in hospital having his hip done, it was Bert who watered his tomatoes for 6 weeks and never mentioned it, so that Mr. Okafor came home to a plot in better order than he left it, and a polite fiction that it had managed on its own. When a dry summer leaves the standpipe as the only water on the allotments, Bert is the one who quietly works out a rota so nobody ends up with a row of withered beans. Bert started the surplus table by the gate, too, the one where the glut goes so nobody has to refuse a neighbour's 9th marrow to their face. None of this is leadership in the traditional sense of the word, and yet all of it is. This spring, there was a letter. The letter was from the council, and it contained the words "review of underused land," which everybody on the allotments understood at once to mean that somebody in an office had looked at a map and seen a brown rectangle that could be houses, instead of 90 years of soil and seeds and sheds and shed kettles. Now, there is no official collective noun for a group of allotment holders, although anyone who has sat through a Pumphrey Road AGM would propose a grumble. And the AGM that year was certainly not the usual sleepy business of the tea cleaning rota, the tea urn cleaning rota, or the leak trophy. Oh no, the shed was full of disgruntled lotties. The grumble was grumbling, really, and quite loudly. And this was, as it happens, the moment that Beryl from Plot 2 had been waiting years for. She stood, Her rosette was already pinned to her tweed jacket. She had a manifesto printed. She gave the speech of her life. There were three separate uses of the word battle. There was a passage about not going quietly. There was a stirring bit about standing shoulder to shoulder, during which she stood, regrettably, entirely alone. It was a good speech. It was a rousing speech. And when she sat down, flushed and certain her hour had finally come, the shed went quiet, in the particular way of a room that has been performed at, rather than spoken to. And then, the way it always happens without anybody deciding it, the faces turned to the back of the room, to where Bert was standing by the tea urn, holding a cup. He was nursing it rather than drinking from it because his hands got very twitchy without a spade in them. And somebody piped up, "Hey, Bert, what do you think?" Bert didn't think they should go into battle because Bert isn't at war with the council. He's just trying not to lose the plot, if you'll forgive the awful pun. What Bert thought and said, slowly, in roughly the time it takes a kettle to boil, was that underused is a thing you can answer. That an empty-looking, muddy plot in February is an abundant one in July, and the council had only ever been round in February. And that if everyone sent in one photograph, the marrows, the kids on plot 14, Mr. Okafor's tomatoes, the surplus table groaning, then the brown triangle on somebody's map, or rectangle, it's a rectangle, on somebody's map, would turn back into 90 years of people, which is a far harder thing to bulldoze. And they might offer the council the 6 empty plots by the brambles under the sycamore tree, maybe for a community growing scheme or for the local primary school or the care home, so that underused stopped being true rather than just stopped being said. There was no battle cry. Nobody stood shoulder to shoulder. But by the end of the evening, there was a plan that shared the work out and pointed squarely at next year and the year after, and everyone in that shed had something to do in the morning. They had recognized Bert, they had turned to him, and Bert had handed them back their own best self. There is, of course, another kind of grower entirely. And you met her already on her feet with her rosette. Our Beryl. And the thing people miss about Beryl is that she isn't wrong. You know, Beryl can see exactly what the lotties could be. She has a vision, a proper shining one, in which Pumphrey Road gets a guest spot on Gardener's World, a ribbon to cut, and a write-up in the local paper that, for once, doesn't mention the bins. Her campaign to ban the gnomes, whatever the traditionalists say, had legs, even if the gnomes didn't. But the point is that Beryl understands what's needed. Or at the very least, she understands what Beryl needs, and she's never really been sure there's any difference. What Beryl cannot seem to do is wait to be asked. Every spring she campaigns, she leaflets, she has her manifesto with bullet points and a vision statement about the Pumphrey Road of tomorrow. She corners people by the compost bins and tells them at great length what she would do. And every spring the slips come out of the tin and Beryl has lost again and goes home to reprint her manifesto while the chair passes yet again to a man who didn't even put his own name down, and it makes Beryl bitter. Proper bitter. The very particular bitterness of someone who can see the bright future clear as day and cannot, for the life of her, understand why nobody will invite her into it. Beryl is not a bad woman, and that's the whole of it. She's just someone who cannot bear the silence of not being chosen, and has found exactly one thing to do about it, and that's get louder. want it harder and push. And every year the pushing moves the prize a little further off, which makes her push harder still. And she goes back to her dahlias in despair. This is gate 31, the gate of influence, sitting in the throat center where the thing turns into a voice, into the thing the group actually goes and does. It runs on collective logic, the circuit forever asking the unshowy, future-facing question of, will this work for everyone again and again? Sharing and the long game are its native tongue. And here's the mechanism that explains the whole of Bert. The logic circuit is energy hungry with no motor reaching the throat, so it can only wait and speak when there's a genuine invitation for it, in the right timing. Bert's long silence between crises isn't modesty, it's the gate doing exactly what the gate is built to do, holding the voice back until someone recognizes the correct person to lead and invites them in. Gate 31 reaches across the channel to Gate 7, the role of the self. And Gate 7 isn't the leader, Gate 7 is the chair, the literal seat at the head of the trestle table, which exists whether anyone worthy ever sits on it or not. Together they make the channel of the alpha a design of leadership, for good or bad. And it's a projected channel. It's not here to initiate. It's not here to seize the day. It works only on recognition, on invitation, only when the grumble turns and says, hey, go on, Bert, what do you think? They call Gate 31 the voice of democracy. And at Pumphrey Road, they prove it every spring with a biscuit tin full of paper slips. Bert is elected because he is recognized as someone with influence and because he waits to be asked. Beryl is passed over because she never waits, and an invitation, by its nature, is the one thing you cannot hand to yourself. The gate cannot be campaigned for, it can only be recognized and invited in. The allotments were saved, in the end, the slow way, with photographs and a growing scheme and a council officer who came out in July and saw the marrows. It was all very logical. And the following spring, at the AGM, Bert stood up, actually stood up, which caused a small stir because Bert standing up usually just means the tea's ready, and he said he thought it was somebody else's turn now, and he'd be very glad to step down. They voted him back in. Of course they did. A man who holds the chair that lightly, who'd hand it over tomorrow without a backward glance, is precisely the man you can trust to sit in it. And that's the bit Beryl will never crack. The wanting is the disqualification. The chair goes to the one who could take it or leave it, and means it. Bert never wanted the chair, and they've always known it. And that's exactly why they keep handing it to him. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Gatecrashers to explore Bert and Gate 31. So look after your marrows, everybody, and go gently.